this session, staff-wise anyway. And I'm over in the Uncompahgre Valley, Erie County, traditional land of the Nooch people.
And I'm Terry Parker, Executive Director at Rocky Mountain Wild.
John Stansfield with on the board of Wild Connections. And we have in our area of interest, we have so many tribal histories. It's incredible. And it's probably too long to mention. And at this point, it's not a funny thing. It's an amazing thing where the Rockies meet the plains, how significant that area was in tribal history, and significantly still for all the rest of us too. Well, at least those of us who live here. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, everyone. So you can all see my screen, I'm hoping? Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, I think you guys all probably are aware about why corridors matter and what connectivity is, but basically it's the idea of animals being able to move across the landscape as they need to access resources they need, whether it's food, water, places to safely raise their young, or maybe they need to disperse into new areas to find new territories. And as a connected landscape allow plants and animals to do this as they need, and as the landscape becomes fragmented, wildlife populations also become fragmented. And connected landscapes are really important to us here in Colorado. Each year, Colorado's economy receives $5.1 billion from wildlife viewing, hunting, and fishing. And I think that's a pretty old number at this point, so it could even be more in 2021. And as I mentioned, I am going to focus mostly on fragmentation or connectivity in corridors as it pertains to roadways. We know that wildlife in Colorado is facing a lot of pressure from a lot of different sources, whether it's housing, energy, recreation trails. But one of the biggest threats to connectivity is roads. So imagine being a bear or a deer and trying to cross this. And as Colorado population grows, so does the amount of traffic on our roadway. And the more people we have on our roads, the more barriers wildlife are going to have to their movement, which is going to prevent them from being able to access the resources that they need. Each year in Colorado, there are 3,600 collisions with wildlife that are reported to law enforcement. So those are accidents that are big enough to cause damage or injuries that they need to be reported to law enforcement. On average, it's about 3.3 human fatalities, 266 accidents where people are injured, and many more accidents mainly with smaller animals go unreported. Each year in Colorado, there are as many mule deer killed in wildlife vehicle collisions as are hunted. In some areas, these collisions are the single highest source of wildlife mortality. And this number just astounds me. Every year in Colorado, as a society, we spend $80 million on costs that are associated with wildlife vehicle collisions. So this is insurance and medical bills, car repairs, emergency services, and that doesn't include the value of the wildlife killed or the impacts to those wildlife populations. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some great solutions to this issue. And wildlife crossing structures, including overpasses and underpasses, are proven to be one of the most effective ways to create safer roads for both wildlife and people. Reconnecting the landscape with wildlife crossing structures not only keep wildlife populations healthy, which has associated ecological, social, and economic benefits, but it also makes our roadways safer for humans, motorists as well. Across North America, wildlife crossing structures and wildlife fencing have been shown to reduce wildlife-related accidents by upwards of 95%. And I mentioned the fencing because when you put in these mitigation structures, you really have to have fencing that helps guide the animals to them. So they're not also able to still cross the roadway at grade. And this is an example of Colorado's very first overpass on State Highway 9, which was built a few years ago. And this is another example of an overpass up in Banff. They've been building structures for quite a long time now and have some pretty amazing research that shows how successful they are.
Hey, Paige,
yeah.
Do you want to have us hold our questions till the end, or?
No, I think it's fine if you want to ask a question while we're in the.
Yeah, I have a question on Highway 550, especially between Montrose and Ridgeway. Mm-hmm. There was a major effort probably 15 years ago now to fence the highway on both sides to mitigate motor vehicle collisions. Mm-hmm. But of course, now we're learning that that kind of miles and miles of fencing is a huge barrier to not only daily migration, but seasonal migration. And so in your opinion, like, is it time to just take that fencing down, or wait until we have the money for some of these now better solutions?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it really depends on the area and what the wildlife are using the area for, like what kind of habitat the area is in, and then also like what kind of wildlife vehicle collisions we're looking at. Ideally, the structures would get built and you would have the fencing and the wildlife structures together, but whether to take down the fencing without the structures, that's a hard question. I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Because of course, this fencing is not guiding them
right
across. It is barring them from being able to traverse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Without knowing more specifics about like the amount of traffic on the roadway and the type of habitat that's there, that's a hard question to answer. But it's a good question. It really is. And you know, in an ideal situation, the fencing wouldn't just be fencing, it would be fencing and wildlife crossing structures. Because I agree, the fencing is definitely just a huge barrier to the wildlife.
Thank you.
Paige, what was the statistic in terms of the reduction of, I don't know if it was collisions or mortality with crossing and when crossing and fencing are in place?
Across North America, we've seen upwards of 95% reduction.
Great, thank you.
And then, so this is an example of an underpass. This is also on State Highway 9, and you can see this little guy just successfully crossed under the roadway. And so these are some statistics from the State Highway 9 project, which just completed it was a 5-year study looking at the effectiveness of the structures that were built, and we just completed this study. So on State Highway 9, between Silverthorne and Kremling, about 20 miles south of Kremling, two overpasses and 5 underpasses were built. And I think it was 10 miles, not 20 miles. So within this 10-mile stretch of highway, we have 2 overpasses and 5 underpasses, plus fencing, plus escape ramps for wildlife that get stuck within the right-of-way to get out. And we've seen wildlife vehicle collisions in the area have been reduced by 90%. There was an average of 56.4 hits per year. That's down to 7 following the construction. And this area has a lot of private land around it. So there's a lot of access points that with deer guards and other things that we're still kind of trying to figure out the best way to work on those access points. But that's still a pretty significant decrease in wildlife vehicle collisions. And in the first 5 years post-construction, we documented mule deer using the structures 112,000 times. So that's 112,000 times that an animal has used a structure to cross the roadway and not have to be in the line of traffic. So overall, these structures were highly successful. A big win for Colorado. This is one of the first major crossing projects in Colorado, and a really great project with the Colorado Department of Transportation and Parks and Wildlife to work together. And I think it's leading to some really great things here in Colorado.
Paige, any idea the cost on that project?
Oh yes, I know it, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
I don't know it off the top of my head. And you know, it wasn't just the wildlife crossing structures. It was also, there were some safety improvements, like they widened the road and I think they straightened it in some places. So it wasn't just the wildlife crossing structures. But I can get that number and I can get that back to you.
Paige, I can look for it right. I can look for it right now too.
Okay, thanks, Terry.
Mm-hmm.
Paige, have you heard any or seen any projections with the I-25 South Gap monument to Castle Rock with the structures that they're putting in place now? Are there any projections for what kind of reduction in collisions and et cetera on that stretch?
Yeah, I mean, the structures that they're putting in are really nice and really big. It's going to be different than State Highway 9 because State Highway 9 is in mule deer winter habitat. So those 112,000 movements are animals, like during the winter, animals are moving back and forth daily. And I think the area on I-25 it's different habitat. I don't know the specifics, but it's not winter mule deer habitat. They are also working on getting, I think they have design money for a overpass on I-25, sorry, which is exciting. And then, sorry, my dog is overexcited. And the other thing with I-25 and the difference between I-25 and State Highway 9 is that you're dealing with an interstate versus a, a two-lane highway. So right. Interstates tend to just, the amount of traffic just in itself, it just creates a barrier that wildlife don't even really try to move across the roadway anymore. But I do know that the structures that they're putting in are very big, especially for, a big interstate. So I think we're gonna see some good statistics out of that as well.
Good, thanks.
Yeah. So I wanted to take a quick second and just kind of talk about what's happening at the federal level as far as corridors, and then there's a slide about the state level. So in 2018, the Department of Interior signed a secretarial order that directed the states to improve habitat quality in big game winter range and migration corridors. So it directed relevant federal bureaus to work with state, tribal, territorial agencies to enhance and restore migration corridors and winter range habitat for big game species such as elk, mule deer, and pronghorn. And the state wildlife agencies were asked to identify priority corridors and additional research needs as part of their state action plans as part of the secretarial order. There's been some movement on the Wildlife Corridor Conservation Act, which would establish a national wildlife corridor system to provide the protection and restoration of native species and their habitat in the United States. Hi, Gary, welcome. Hi, Gary, welcome. Can you hear us, Gary?
I can, yes.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
I was just giving an overview of what's happening as far with corridors at the federal level. So the Wildlife Corridor Conservation Act was passed in the House in the last Congress, and supporters are hoping that they have to reintroduce it in the current Congress, but they feel like they have a strong chance of the bill getting signed into law under this current administration. Then we have some exciting potential funding opportunities for wildlife crossings, which is kind of new in the world of wildlife crossings, that dedicated funding would be put towards them. So we've got the Transportation and Infrastructure Bill that has dedicated funding for wildlife crossings. Again, it had movement in the last Congress, and we're kind of in a wait and see mode for this current Congress. And then there's also this federal stimulus funding, which is 1.9 trillion that will give money to the states, with some that's dedicated for infrastructure, and then some that will specifically go to wildlife crossings. So it's exciting that we're at a point where money is, because funding is usually the biggest issue with getting these things built. And so it's exciting to have some dedicated funding coming to them now. Now here in Colorado, after the State Highway 9, there had been a little bit of momentum before the State Highway 9 project, but it really kind of started the ball rolling here in Colorado for some pretty significant steps. After State Highway 9 in 2017, the Department of Transportation, Parks and Wildlife held the first ever Wildlife and Transportation Summit, the purpose of which was to establish partnerships and develop action plans to improve highway safety and protect wildlife populations and their movement corridors. From that came the Colorado Wildlife and Transportation Alliance, which was established in 2018, and as a statewide coalition, again, between the Colorado Department of Transportation, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but then also federal, tribal, academic, nonprofit, and engineering partners. Then in 2019, Governor Polis signed an executive order which directs state wildlife transportation agencies to identify policy and regulatory opportunities to promote the conservation of seasonal big game habitat and migration corridors. And as part of this, the Department of Natural Resources is working on a kind of a corridor report. And we're waiting to, we're supposed to be getting a complete draft has been finished and has been sent to Parks and Wildlife leadership for review. And now they're hoping to go ahead and send it out to other Parks and Wildlife employees next week. And then I guess it'll come out for some stakeholder review before it's publicly released. And then we've got the West Slope Prioritization, which was completed in April 2019. And this was a study that again emerged from the commitment to increase collaboration between the Colorado Department of Transportation and Colorado Parks and Wildlife to address wildlife conflicts on roads. And the objective involved identifying wildlife highway conflict areas where targeted mitigation could have the greatest impact on reducing wildlife vehicle collisions. And the results are going to inform the siting, design, construction of effective wildlife mitigation on the West Slope. And they are now undergoing another study, a similar study, but looking at the East Slope, an East Slope prioritization. And then finally, we've got the state stimulus budget has a tiny pot of money identified for wildlife crossing structures. But then also kind of the more exciting piece of it is that they've identified a position at the Department of Natural Resources that would kind of be a liaison between, it would be a Colorado Parks and Wildlife employee, but they would liaise between their agency and the Department of Transportation so that there's be a specific person that would be working on connectivity issues between those two agencies. So that's really exciting there. Then meanwhile, so these are all kind of state level things that are happening. And then meanwhile, there have also been several grassroots initiatives that are leading the way to conserve habitat and improve connectivity for wildlife, as well as address motorist safety at the local level. And these efforts are really important as more and more people move and visit Colorado and are putting more and more pressure on our wildlife populations. So one example of such an effort is the Summit County Safe Passages Connectivity Plan for Wildlife. And this was a product of a year-long collaborative effort among agencies, local governments, nonprofits, community groups, landowners, and other interested parties. And the idea was to provide a common vision and specific recommendations for protecting wildlife movement corridors and reducing wildlife-related collisions on Summit County roadways. I think it's pretty cool. This project was born out of an offsite mitigation effort between the Forest Service and the Department of Transportation for a Highway 9 realignment near Frisco. And if they were to do on-site mitigation for that project, it really wouldn't have done anything great for wildlife. So the Forest Service and CDOT decided to take a time out. They took a step back. They instead of using that money for mitigation that wouldn't really do anything, they instead decided to do this connectivity assessment, looking at the county as a whole to really try to understand where the biggest needs are in the county. So at the end of this assessment, they identified 17 wildlife linkages throughout the county. You can see them highlighted here in blue. And knowing that, you know, having a plan is all good and well, but we really didn't want it to just sit on a shelf and collect dust. So the stakeholder group identified 3 priority areas to move forward with in the near term. So you can see those here. We've got State Highway 9, we've got the lower Blue River, the upper Blue River, and it says the Wyval Pass Wildlife Byway on the map, but now it's been renamed to the I-70 Eastfield Pass Wildlife Crossings. So the lower blue linkage, which is the one up here in the north, it provides important year-round habitat for mule deer, elk, moose, as well as carnivores such as black bear and mountain lions. And I believe this linkage has actually been moved up a little bit to the north so that it can connect the project that the State Highway 9 project just dips down a tiny bit into Summit County. So they really want to kind of connect, keep that project moving south so that, because we've seen some increased wildlife vehicle collisions just south of that project area. So there's still some need for wildlife mitigation to the south of that project. And then you've got the upper Blue River, which is located again on State Highway 9, south of Breckenridge in the town of Blue River. And this is important habitat for moose and allows deer, elk, and dispersing Canada lynx to move across the valley, which is experiencing increasing development and traffic. And then finally, you've got the I-70 Eastfield Pass Wildlife Crossings, which is located on I-70 between Copper Mountain and then the top of Wyval Pass. And I'm going to dive in, if we have time, I'm going to dive in to this project a little bit deeper. What time is it? Okay, we're doing okay. So just a quick overview of Summit County Safe Passages. We've been established as a nonprofit entity. Rocky Mountain Wild is the fiscal sponsor. We have a very nice website. The plan has been endorsed by the county. And then we've been holding, pre-COVID, we were holding quite a few community education and outreach events. The partnership was recognized as Colorado Parks and Wildlife 2020 Northwest Region Partner of the Year last year. And then Ashley Nettles, who is a biologist with the Forest Service and who pretty much spearheaded the effort since the very beginning, she won the 2020 Public Lands Alliance Partnership Award for agency leadership. So a lot of really great things are happening with that organization. And did I do with my, okay, here we go. And so with that, I wanted to take a little bit deeper dive. Let's see if we have any questions that we should. Oh,
I think, Paige, we're okay. There's a question regarding the federal infrastructure bill, which I just don't have the answer to, because I'm not sure that it exists in that strong of that finished of a state yet. I think it's kind of moving, okay. But I think I've tried to hit everything else that's gone on over here. We've talked cost of State Highway 9 and a little bit about a crossing project on US 550 in that area that Robin was concerned about.
Okay. Thanks, Terry. All right.
It's fun. I feel like a content expert.
So for the last part, I want to just take a deep dive into this I-70 Eastfield Pass wildlife crossings, which is a priority initiative of Summit County Safe Passages. And it's kind of it's been a project of Rocky Mountain Wild for quite some time. And so this is a story map that I created that kind of just gives an overview of the project and some exciting developments that have happened with the project. So first to start, Wyval Pass. So it's an ecologically significant area. It's nestled in the mountains between Copper Mountain and the top of Wyval Pass. I-70 Eastfield Pass has long been identified as an ecologically significant site, both within and beyond Colorado for a variety of wildlife. It's encompassed entirely by the White River National Forest, including the Eagle's Nest Wilderness to the north. This is a picture from the Eagle's Nest Wilderness. It's one of the most intact, important habitats for many wildlife species along Colorado's mountain corridor. So Eastfield Pass is home to one of the few known breeding populations of Canada lynx outside of Southwest Colorado, where they were reintroduced to the state in the late 1990s. And as I'm sure most of you know, they're listed as a federally threatened species. So Wyval Pass provides important habitat to these native cats, as well as their primary prey, the snowshoe hare. Wyval Pass is also important summer habitat for Rocky Mountain elk. And so reconnecting landscapes like Wyval Pass that are otherwise intact is key to ensuring these animals have the access to the resources they need to survive. As summer habitat, it's important that they have the food and the resources they need to be healthy enough to go into the winter. And then mule deer, this is also important summer habitat for mule deer, and both mule deer and elk present a significant hazard for drivers on I-70. So providing safe passage for these guys will also improve safety for the traveling public. So as I mentioned, the Summit County Safe Passages Plan identified area of the greatest needs for wildlife movement across highways in Summit County. It was completed in 2017 and identifies Eastfield Pass as a priority initiative. So these are the current conditions on Eastfield Pass. It's a divided highway with a wide natural open median. You can see West 10 Mile Creek going down the median, and then also the Wyval Pass recreation trail winds down the median. It's an important travel corridor for Colorado's adventure community with residents, tourists, industries, all need to use this stretch of the highway. And on average, it sees 23,000 vehicles each day. I mean, as we talked about earlier, this much traffic just presents a barrier that most animals aren't even going to attempt to cross. And if they do, oftentimes they're unsuccessful. So this is a video that was taken last fall, midday, so not a high traffic time for Wyval Pass. There's some research out of Wyoming that shows that mule deer need a break in traffic of at least 60 seconds to be able to cross the roadway safely. This video is 60 seconds long, so you can see there really is not a good break in traffic, even outside of peak travel times on Wyval Pass. So currently there are 5 existing span bridges on the eastbound lane. So you remember the highway is divided here. So the eastbound lanes going towards Denver, there's 5 nice big span bridges like this one that wildlife can use. But there's only one present on the westbound lane. So this is the one that's on the westbound lanes. And there's no good connections between these bridges that allow for wildlife to safely cross the entire highway. So this is a map that shows the 5 span bridges. You can, if you're looking at the story map, you can kind of click through these, but you can see through the little thumbnail pictures that they're very big, very nice, great for wildlife movement. But so there's one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and then the only one on the westbound lanes is up here towards the top of the pass. So late 2020, the Summit County Safe Passages Plan, well, let me step back. So the Summit County Safe Passages Plan recommends 3 wildlife crossing structures for this stretch of highway, 2 underpasses and 1 overpass, all for the westbound lanes of Eastfield Pass. And with funding from Vail Resorts, A Basin, and the Center for Large Landscapes, the Wood engineering team completed the I-70 Eastfield Pass Wildlife Crossings feasibility study late last year. And this study developed and evaluated preliminary engineering designs for the 3 recommended locations. So these are the 3 recommended locations. And the feasibility study looked at things, wildlife needs, and the feasibility of building each structure based on cost, traffic, environmental conditions, and topography and constructability at each crossing location. And as we talked about before, you need wildlife exclusion fencing to make the any mitigation to be a success. So on Eastfield Pass, the eastbound and westbound lanes of I-70 must each be fenced because it is a divided highway. So both sides of each direction of traffic will need to be fenced so that the habitat in the wide open median remains usable for wildlife. So this is the first structure. It's a buried bridge at the lower part of the pass. At milepost 193.5. And the Summit County Safe Passages Plan does recommend an underpass at this location. And it looked at, it recommended a diversity of structure types so that to ensure that it's suitable crossing opportunities for the greatest variety of species, because different species are gonna want to use different types of structures. So a buried bridge is recommended at milepost 193.5. And this location is important for elk. And it's across from an existing bridge under the eastbound lanes, creating so it creates a nearly direct connection across I-70 for elk. And by providing a larger underpass at milepost 193.5 and an overpass at 192.3, which is further up the pass, and we'll get to in a minute, elk passes is going to be accommodated across the widest geographic area. So this structure, you want underpass openings to be high enough to accommodate larger animals like elk and moose. So the preliminary design assumes a standard a concrete bridge with a 15-foot clearance below. And again, you want the structures to be wide enough to encourage animals to enter. So we're looking at 85 feet wide. And this width of the structure is based on the idea if a third lane were ever to be added to Eastfield Pass on I-70, that this width would still be wide enough to accommodate wildlife movement. Because as the structure gets longer, it needs to be wider so that wildlife will actually use the structure. So the proposed underpass structure length from the view of wildlife using the structure is 45 feet. And again, that would, actually, never mind, I'm not gonna say that. And then, so it's a buried bridge, so it's gonna have 4 feet of fill. And basically it's a traditional bridge, but this 4 feet of fill on top of it provides some insulation that will avoid icing concerns of a traditional bridge. So this is a before and after. So this is what it currently looks like on I-70 on Eastfield Pass. And then this is what it would look like after the structure, if the structure was built. So next is in the middle, we've got an arch underpass at milepost 193. Again, the Summit County Safe Passages Plan recommends an underpass at 193. And the feasibility study looked at an arch. Well, the feasibility study considered 3 different structures: a buried arch, a traditional bridge, and a buried bridge, and moved forward a buried arch at this location. So this is a little bit smaller than the other underpass options, but it's still designed with adequate vertical clearance and opening size to accommodate mule deer, lynx, and possibly elk, but they take a little bit more time to habituate to structures like this. We're looking at a 13.5 foot clearance below, a 44 foot wide, and then again, a 45 foot length that has the 2 lanes of traffic and then the right of way. And again, this structure would have 4 feet of fill, which would help with icing concerns. So here again this is what it looks like now. And this is what it will look like once the structure is built. And finally, at the top of the pass at milepost 192.3, we've got a recommended overpass. The Summit County Safe Passages Plan recommended an overpass, again, to give a diversity of structures that will help the greatest variety of wildlife to be able to move across the roadway. And so we looked at 2 overpass options, a traditional angled wall overpass, and then an hourglass overpass. And the study moved forward, the feasibility study moved forward with an hourglass overpass at milepost 192.3. So again, this area is important for elk. And although the overpass is more expensive than an underpass, it's going to provide better connectivity for a wider variety of species, but especially elk, which require excellent visibility and openness to feel comfortable using a structure. And this would be the first hourglass shaped overpass in the US. So this design offers unique aesthetic appeal, innovative engineering, and the visibility of an overpass on Eastfield Pass is going to provide an excellent public education opportunity. If you drive on State Highway 9 and you see those overpasses, they're quite stunning, but you probably don't know when you're crossing over an underpass. So an overpass really offers a great opportunity for outreach and education. So the overpass width was calculated based on the distance that wildlife are going to have to travel to get across the structure. And the hourglass overpass, even though it's narrower at the center point, it's the same width as a traditional overpass in the approaches in the crossing structure. And this narrower width potentially brings down the cost of the structure. It also allows, the overpass design also allows for a more gentle and even grade across the length of the structure. So it's going to provide better visibility for wildlife crossing over the structure. The roadway opening would be 80 feet. And again, this would accommodate 3 lanes of 12-foot, 3 12-foot lanes. So if a 3rd lane were to ever be added to Eastfield Pass on I-70, this overpass is not going to preclude that. So they will be able to move forward with that. They also have to take into consideration snow storage and other things with this width. So here again this is what it looks like now. And this is what it will look like once the structure is built. So I'm going to kind of skip over, for time's sake, skip over this section. It's just kind of special considerations for each structure that they had to think about. I can share the link of the story map if anybody wants to. Actually, well, Terry will mention at the end that we're going to do another presentation. So I'm going to skip over this. And so this is kind of the fun part. So for the past 5 years, Rocky Mountain Wild and Denver Zoo have been doing some pre-construction monitoring. Right now, for the past 5 years, it's been just in the area of the proposed overpass, but this coming summer, we're expanding to include the 2 proposed underpass locations as well. But this is a community science project that we use remote triggered cameras. And through this monitoring, we've seen nearly every species of wildlife found in Colorado's mountains. So this is kind of a fun map. You can see here, these are the 3 proposed structures. These are the existing structures. And then these are just some examples of all the wildlife that have been documented on the pass. So a very wide diversity of wildlife species. And then this section just lets you kind of scroll through and see some of the photos that were on the above map and see them a little bit bigger. So a lot of deer, a lot of elk, moose, American marten, one of my favorites. Canada lynx. It's a great video that we got. Another lynx. Red fox, porcupine, coyote, another lynx, goshawk, black bear, another porcupine, moose, and then wait for it, baby moose, mama and baby, mule deer, spotted skunk, which I guess are not common on Wyval Pass. I didn't realize, but that was a unique sighting. Other marten, mountain lion, bear, bobcat, marten, raccoon, snowshoe hare, like this one because you can see it changing colors. Hummingbird, kind of a fun picture. Marmot. Marmot. This picture, actually, I think you've got an elk and mule deer in the same picture, which is kind of cool. You can see the snowshoe hare's feet are changing. You can see mule deer over here, the far left, the highway behind them. This one, oh, there's a marten on the far left. and mule deer and some elk. Moose, you can see the highway behind him. This is one of my favorites. That's it. So next steps. Now that we have the feasibility study, next steps are to conduct environmental review, complete the final engineering designs, and then construct the mitigation structures. So the next phase will begin project scoping to ensure the project designs do not negatively impact the environment. Once this has been established, the designs can be refined and approved, at which point they can be ready for bidding and construction. Once they are completed, they will go out for bidding, and then construction will include monitoring to ensure environmental compliance with stakeholder and permit requirements. It'll also be scheduled to minimize traffic interruptions and detours, as I-70 is an important transportation corridor throughout the Rocky Mountains. And so while these crossing structures provide important ecological and economic benefits, all these steps are going to require nearly $21 million to create. So we need support from a variety of public, private, state, and federal sources. Right now, we're focusing on getting the study, what they call shovel ready, so getting through design, because a lot of times when federal and state funding becomes available, they look for projects that are fully designed and ready to go. So that's our first goal, is to get this project fully designed. We're about 10% designed with the feasibility study. So this section just kind of talks about what you can do: donate, spread the word, tell your friends about the impact of I-70 and the importance of reconnecting wildlife habitat in the area. Help out with the monitoring project on Wyval Pass by becoming a community scientist, or participating in events. Once we're kind of through the COVID and able to be more out in the public, we'll be doing a whole bunch of events throughout the community. And that's the end. That's all that I have. So I see that there are some more chats. I'll stop sharing and then kind of open it up. We have about 10 more minutes, I think.
Yep, Paige, I think we've dealt with everything in the chat. I guess if anybody has additional live questions, now's the time.
Yeah, Paige, this is Robin again. And thank you so much. Fabulous presentation. And as I said, so much to celebrate. Such great work. Thank you. And, you know, each of us probably knows the corridors in our own region. So I don't know the priorities across the state. But if we were like to try and advocate for underpasses and overpasses on one or more stretches of road, like what is the very initial stage? Do you need the support of county commissioners? Is it CPW? Is it CDOT? Is it all of those? Is it citizens rallying together that really moves it forward?
Yeah, I think it's all of those. I think you know, the first, like the easiest thing would be if your stretch of highway is in the prioritization, and I think they're looking at like the top 5%. That's what they're going to focus on to start. So if that your stretch of roadway ends up being in that prioritization in the top 5%, then you know, you're already in have pretty good footing. You can talk to the Department of Transportation, talk to Parks and Wildlife, see how you can help. I think including the county and municipal elected officials is really important. I think, you know, in Summit County that the plan has been adopted by or endorsed by the county is really helpful. Not so much in like necessarily moving the project forward, but they are saying that they are committing to looking at the needs of wildlife as they move forward with other things that are happening in the county, whether it's land, land use or zoning and things like that. So I think talking with all those people is really important. And then also the public getting, if you look at the, I don't know if you are familiar with the project out in California. I think it's Highway 101 with the LA Cougars. Like, they have had a tremendous amount of public support. I think it's really helped to elevate that project to really a national level. Like, people know about that project nationally. So they've been able to do some pretty amazing fundraising, but a lot of that has come from having public support for that.
Great. If we wanted to find that prioritization list, where would we go?
I can send you, actually I can put a link in the chat right now.
Okay.
But if awesome. Let's see. Here, I'm gonna send a link to, got a couple of PDFs. There's one that's like a cost benefit analysis. And then the other one is the final report. And then I think from that, there's probably other resources. I'd have to do a little bit of digging to figure out what they are, but that would actually tell you kind of more. I'm not sure if the prioritization study has like a list or what's in there exactly, but let me know if you want more information and I can do some digging for you.
Great, Paige. Thank you so much. Fabulous.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, we've been part of a group that's been lobbying the governor to talk about which priorities they should be using the stimulus funds for. And we've been looking at shovel-ready projects, and so I do have a list of those too, if anybody's interested. Oh, John.
Yeah, can you put those on the chat?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Good, thank you.
Excuse me.
Well, thank you for coming this morning. I hope it was somewhat useful.
Very good, very good. Thank you.
Entertaining to look at pictures.
Super informative. I know, and the videos are great. The story map is exquisite, Paige.
Oh, thank you. It was a fun project to put together.
And I'll be really excited. I don't drive Wyval Pass very often, but I'm going to pay a whole lot more attention in the coming years and as that construction happens. So,
yeah.
John, Robin, I will go ahead and just email you that list because I don't have it as a link at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Yeah. And I did want to let you guys know that during Endangered Species Week, Paige is going to be doing a similar version of the same presentation for the general public. And if broadbands and the broads and well connections would like to help support promoting that, we'd love to have you guys help us get the word out on that.
Great.
Yes.
Be happy to.
Yeah, we will plan on supporting that, not just the areas that the events that we're providing donations for specifically, but that's right up our alley. So yeah, definitely we want to promote it.
Cool.
Yeah, send us info, Terry, if that's available already.
Paige and we'll finalize that.
Okay.
Today.
Or next week or whenever.
You know how it goes.
Right, thank you. So
we don't need it just today. Tomorrow would be not too soon.
Okay, all right, I'll work on it.
All right, take care. Have a good morning.
You too. Thank you.